members asked, and maybe in a cheering up kind of method, with some quoting Bill Gates or somebody that said, you know, if you haven't failed, then you're not learning, or it's a paraphrase of the quote. And I remember your reply, and I have it written as a quote because I want to put it on a placard. Given the options, I prefer to learn from success, which I think is a great comeback. And so I guess I was curious in general, what do you think of the Silicon Valley mantra, fail fast, fail often, or as Esther Dyson says, always make new mistakes, as if failure is the crucible of learning? I'm curious if you had any further thoughts on that, and that maybe off-the-cuff comment you made out there.
Well, I mean, there are many that sort of, I mean, I think there's like some entropic basis for this. Like, there are many more ways to fail than to succeed. So you have to explore, I mean, particularly like for a rocket, there's like 1,000 ways to think and fail, and like one way it can work. So you could have a lot of rocket failures to explore all the ways in which it could fail. But I do think that one great thing about Silicon Valley is that failure is not a big stigma. So it's like if you try hard and it doesn't work out, that's okay. Like you can learn from that and do another company, and it's not a big deal. And I think that's really one of the great things about Silicon Valley.
And I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing.
Me Too type ideas.
Yeah,
slight
iterations
take,
on a theme, and it's kind of mentally easier to reason by analogy rather than from first principles. But by first principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world, and what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths, and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true, and then reason up from there. That takes a lot more mental energy.
Give me an example of that. Like, what's one thing that you've done that on that you feel has worked for you?
Sure. So somebody could say, in fact people do, that battery packs are really expensive, and that's just the way they'll always be, because that's the way they've been in the past. You're like, well, no, that's pretty dumb, because if you applied that reasoning to anything new, then you wouldn't be able to ever get to that new thing.
Right.
It's like you can't say, horses, nobody wants a car because horses are great and we're used to them and they can eat grass and there's lots of grass all over the place, and there's there's no gasoline that people can buy, so people are never going to get cars.
Right.
People did say that, and for batteries, they would say, it's going to cost, historically it's cost $600 per kilowatt hour, and so it's not going to be much better than that in the future. And you say, no, okay, well, what are the batteries made of? So first principles would be to say, okay, what are the material constituents of the batteries? What is the spot market value of the material constituents? So you can say, okay, it's got cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, and some polymers for separation, and a steel can. So break that down on a material basis and say, okay, if we bought that on the London Metal Exchange, what would each of those things cost? Like, oh, geez, it's like $80 per kilowatt hour. So clearly, you just need to think of clever ways to take those materials and combine them into the shape of a battery cell, and you can have batteries that are much, much cheaper than anyone realizes.
Some of them are going to sound like, well, you've heard it before, but it's worth re-emphasizing. I think the first is you need to work, depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and we're so hot up we had just one computer. So the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night, 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard, like I mean, every waking hour. That's the thing I would say, particularly if you're starting a company. And I mean, if you do simple math, you say like, okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company. The other thing I'd say is that if you're creating a company or if you're joining a company, the most important thing is to attract great people. So either join a group that's amazing, that you really respect, or if you're building a company, you've got to gather great people. I mean, all a company is a group of people that have gathered together to create a product or service. And so depending upon how talented and hardworking that group is, and the degree to which they are focused cohesively in a good direction, that will determine the success of the company. So do everything you can to gather great people if you're creating a company. Then I'd say focus on signal over noise. A lot of companies get confused. They spend money on things that don't actually make the product better. So, for example, at Tesla, we've never spent any money on advertising. We put all of the money into R&D and manufacturing and design to try to make the car as good as possible. I think that's the way to go. So for any given company, just can keep thinking about, are these efforts that people are expending, are they resulting in a better product or service? And if they're not, stop those efforts. And then the final thing is to sort of don't just follow the trend. So you may have heard me say that it's good to think in terms of the physics approach of first principles, which is, rather than reasoning by analogy, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths you can imagine, and you reason up from there. And this is a good way to figure out if something really makes sense, or if it's just what everybody else is doing. It's hard to think that way. You can't think that way about everything. It takes a lot of effort. But if you're trying to do something new, it's the best way to think. And that framework was developed by physicists to figure out counterintuitive things like quantum mechanics. So it's really a powerful method. Anyway, so that's, and then I think that the final thing I would encourage you to do is, now is the time to take risk. You don't have, yeah, you don't have kids. Your obligation. Well, sorry, probably don't have kids. But as you get older, your obligations increase. So and once you have a family, you start taking risk not just for yourself, but for your family as well. It gets much harder to do things that might not work out. So now is the time to do that before you have those obligations. So I would encourage you to take risks now. Do something bold. You won't regret it. Thank you.
People want to be more like you.
Really?
So, and for the fate of humankind, I think it would be great to have more Elon Musks. So what do we need to do to become more like Elon?
I don't know if it's, I think it maybe sounds better than it is. Yeah, I mean, honestly, like there's a friend of mine who's got a great saying about creating a company, which is trying to build a company and have it succeed is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. So, I mean, what tends to happen is it's sort of quite exciting for the first several months of starting a company, and then reality sets in. Things don't go as well as planned. Customers aren't signing up. The technology or the product isn't working as well as you thought. And then that can sometimes be compounded by a recession, and it can be very, very painful for several years. So I think, frankly, starting a company, I would advise people to have a high pain tolerance.
Yeah. And thanks for reminding us of the harsh, very harsh and brutal reality of launching a startup. There is that Elon Musk / Tony Stark mystique. People think, you are, Robert Downey Jr. modeled his character, Tony Stark, Iron Man, on you. It's easy, it's fun, you're a superhero titan of industry. But it's really hard. It's really difficult, and it's something that requires perseverance and grit. Do you fear that maybe in this generation or the younger generation that they don't have that perseverance and grit to take on these really tough challenges?
I think some people do.
Yeah.
But no, I think it is definitely true that, maybe there are occasionally companies that get created where there's not an extended period of extreme pain. But I'm not aware of, very many of such instances.
Yeah.
But I do think that new great entrepreneurs are born every day.
Yeah.
And we'll continue to see amazing companies get built. Yeah, but I would definitely advise people who are starting a company to expect a long period of quite high difficulty.
Yeah.
But as long as people stay super focused on creating the absolute best product or service that really delights their end customer, if they stay focused on that, then if you get it such that your customers want you to succeed, then you probably will.
All right. You have to focus on the customer and delivering for them.
Yeah. Make
Yeah.
sure if your customers love you, your odds of success are dramatically higher.
Yeah. All the entrepreneurs in this room, they're listening to that message, and we're running out of time, so this is the final question. This is for the budding entrepreneurs in the room who could take an Elon Musk idea and run with it. Quite famously, Hyperloop was the idea that you had to give away because you just don't have enough time to deal with it. What are the other ideas that you have that you would love to see another entrepreneur just take on and go?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity in general in electrification of transport. So electric aircraft, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think in genetics, although that's sort of a thorny area, but I think that's, in terms of solving some of the more intransigent diseases, genetics are really key to solving those. Something that I think people maybe only beginning to look at is establishing some kind of brain-computer interface.
A brain-computer interface.
Yeah, at the neuron level. So this is sort of intelligence augmentation as opposed to artificial intelligence.
Right.
And I think that has a lot of potential.
You mentioned this to me yesterday. I really had kind of no idea what you were talking about, and then I looked up Ian Banks, Neuralink.
Neuralink.
That's right.
Exactly.
And so it's this concept of wiring the brain. So it's either there could be a brain internet. And it could also mean that we can upload our thoughts to the cloud.
You would never forget anything. And you wouldn't need to take photographs.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's incredible. You would never forget anything. You would expand your ability to process information, to remember information, right? But then when the denial of service attack happens,
you gotta watch out for hacking. That could really be awkward.
watch out for that. But also, then I read it can also be used to fight degenerative diseases like Parkinson's too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it actually would be quite an equalizer as well, because I think the delta between, it would sort of even things out, I think.
You mean in humankind, that
Yeah,
people
yeah.
there would be no education disadvantage. Everyone would
Yeah.
be starting at the same level.
Yeah.
So there would be no meritocracy. No, there would be new meritocracy.
There would be, but it would be, the differences would be smaller. The delta would be smaller, probably.
Wow, and you really welcome that kind of world.
How do I welcome, you asked for predictions.
Okay.
Predictions are not the same as
That's right.
preferences. So, do I think something like that is likely to occur? I think probably.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, it's incredible. We could go on and on. Unfortunately, we have to wrap and leave it at that. Let's give it up for Elon Musk. That was really awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.